3, 2, 1. Okay, welcome back to ThinkTech. This is Asia in Review on a given Friday, and we have two very distinguished guests. We have guests who are actually well familiar with Lee Kuan Yew, who died last week. Alan Zecha, to my far left, who is a trustee of HPU here downtown, and Sandy Friedman, who another person well familiar with Lee Kuan Yew, who is teaching at DeVry. Has been teaching for a lifetime in many places. So this is Asia in Review, and I've styled the show in the wake of Lee Kuan Yew. This is dedicated to him, and it's wonderful to have you both here. Thank you for coming down, Alan.
It's my pleasure. And
thank you, Jay, for having us here.
Sure, okay. Let's learn about Lee Kuan Yew. You know, you both were well familiar with him. Can you tell me what the level of familiarity was?
well, actually, if I can start, I have not had the pleasure of meeting him in person and face to face, but my experiences 3 times now in Singapore. The first time was in 1936, and the second one was in 1946, and then after that is in 1972. And during those 3 periods, I have seen many changes that has affected the people and the country because of him.
I was really wondering, you know, when he died, I had the impression from what I read that people were sad, that there was an outpouring of affection for him.
Yes.
And that was consistent with affection that he has enjoyed in Singapore for 50 years anyway.
Yes. As a matter of fact, when I heard of the news, I also had a few tears in my eyes because I respected him and liked him, and I just feel that he was one of the unusual gentlemen that I truly call a true country leader.
You lived in Singapore for a while.
Yes. So the 3rd time in 1972, I was stationed for my company that doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, called Union Carbide, and I was then in charge of the various sections of the company in Southeast Asia. And during that time, of course, I saw everything that I thought was very unusual and so directly connected with the leader at that time was Lee Kuan Yew. And I think a good leader, in my humble opinion, is one that says things, acts it, and is very consistent. And that is what makes him a very good leader.
Yes, I really, that's wonderful, you know, approach to it, because we want to learn about him today so we can figure out what he left us here in Hawaii. Sandy, what was your connection? You spent a lot of time in Singapore.
My first experience in going to Singapore was on R&R in 1968 when I was stationed in Vietnam. So Singapore at that time was under British control.
Let's get your mic back up. Oops. So we want you to be heard. Okay. All right, that'll be better sound. Just flip it in there. That's good.
Okay. Ultimately, I returned to Singapore in 1973, where I lived there for 2 years between Singapore and across the causeway into Johor Bahru, Malaysia. And lately, in the last half a dozen years, because my son now lives in Singapore.
Now there's a connection for you.
We've been going, my wife and I have been going to Singapore several times a year and spending approximately half the year in Singapore, half the year here in Honolulu. I've had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Lee Kuan Yew over dinner a few times, but mostly it's been the seeing of Singapore change from a kampong of malaria-ridden mosquitoes and swamps to an ultra-modern, high-rise financial center for Southeast Asia, all under his watch.
Yeah, well, that's the remarkable thing. As you said, Alan, you judge a man by his deeds.
Yes.
And in this case, the deeds are phenomenal. I mean, he changed the world in changing Singapore, which is a beacon for the world in so many ways.
Right.
He changed the world.
Actually, the transition that I saw in the 3 times I was there is that it was actually a sailor sport at one time, if you can call it that way. And then it became a Southeast Asian hub for trading between the islands. As you know, it is truly a hub because you can trade very easily with Sri Lanka, India, that continent, and in Malaysia, and then with the Philippines and Indonesia especially. So then after that, I saw it becoming a bit of a light industrial sector, and finally a financial center. And now, as you know, everybody agrees, that became a very developed and respected modern country.
Yeah, and the miracle
Yes.
is that, as you said before, he was focused.
Sorry.
He had this vision 50 years ago. He saw it clearly, and he went straight down the path to do that. I have visited, I don't know if you've ever been there, the History Museum
Yes.
of Singapore, which is a very interesting museum because it has television sets, video players. And if you want to know about the strike of 1953, you go and you push the button and you see everything about the strike of 1953.
Yes.
And so forth. All these milestones are all there in this large room of television sets. It's quite remarkable, but you can begin to put it together. And I suppose it goes for the proposition that he was so focused that he could do this.
Yes.
He never lost his focus.
No, very focused, very dynamic, visionary, but also autocratic, Jay.
You're referring to the caning now.
Well, the caning, but also the lack of what we would call democracy. He knew that in order to go from A to B, that there could not be tolerated a lot of dissension. And as a result, he was focused on the results. And I think it's necessary for our audience to understand the size and population of Singapore in respect to Oahu, because Oahu, we are all of 597 square miles, but we have beautiful mountains going through the center of it. Singapore is 45% the size of Oahu. It is only 267 square miles, but it's flat and it's on the equator. So it's very warm, humid, almost all year round.
But no mosquitoes anymore.
A few who escape. But population-wise, Oahu, we have almost 1 million people on this island. Singapore has 5.5 million people. So it's very crowded, it's diverse, but it's interesting to note that one of the major programs that Lee Kuan Yew had instilled into the government and the people was public housing. We hear about public housing all the time here in Hawaii. Singapore manufactures or puts up an average of 40,000 apartments per year. They have over 1 million public housing units, which they have built, so that 80% of the population of Singapore lives in public housing. Well, where do they get the money? They have a social security system similar to what we have. And here in Hawaii, we have the employment retirement system, who invests all of our public monies on the mainland. Singapore takes all of their social security money and invests it in public housing. And they've never lost a dollar, but they have provided housing for the masses.
I'll tell you a short story. In my one trip,
Yes.
I took a taxi cab, and the fellow was from mainland China. He was an immigrant. There's a lot of immigrants, and I guess Lee Kuan Yew
millions.
wanted that. He wanted to build a population. And he told me the story. I forget how we got on the subject. He said the day he arrived in Singapore, he had a home. It belonged to him. He was going to pay it down over time, but the title was in his name, and it belonged to him for life. He had never imagine having a benefit like that in China.
As a matter of fact, when I first came in '72, I heard that he was doing this public housing thing for most of the population, but his idea was to have, let's see, 80% of the people who live in Singapore have housing and proper housing. And these are not cheap housing now. People can misunderstand it and they think, oh, because of this and the government is cheap. No, as a matter of fact, some of my friends and relatives have lived in those places and I visited them, and they are just like some of these nice, not luxurious condominiums, but very well built and very well, the outlay and so forth are very nice.
The high rise.
And they're high rise and very safe.
They're all high-rise because Singapore has a law which says that a developer can go into any apartment complex, be it a 1-story, 3-story, 10-story, and if they can get 80% of the people to agree to sell, everybody has to sell. And of course, they're
That
paid
allows
off
you to redevelop.
and they're redevelop the property, but they're given a building density of at least 3 times greater than what they had knocked down. So obviously, it's a very high-rise metropolitan area, a lot of landfill, but still quite small compared to Oahu. And as you said, Jay, built on immigrants, because initially Singapore was part of Malaysia for 2 years. And it
What
was,
years were they?
this was 1963 and 1964, that Singapore was part of the Confederation of Malaysian States. And at that time, Singapore's gross national product was 1/64th that of Malaysia, because Singapore has no natural resources. Malaysia has land, rubber, tin, all sorts of natural resources.
And also a good location.
And good location. Singapore being at the tip of Malaysia on the Straits of Malacca, and as Alan said, they recognized that there was a lot of trade going through there. It was the Silk Road, but by way of the sea versus the overland Silk Road that goes from China to Europe. So Singapore capitalized on the fact that it had a small population, it needed resources, and they recognized that people are the greatest resources that any country could have. So they opened their doors, but they defined what they were looking for, just as they still do today. And of the 5.5 million population today, about 3 million are permanent residents or citizens of Singapore, which means they have over 2 million immigrants who are there on limited work visas. 1 million of those immigrants come from Bangladesh, and they're all involved in the construction industry. They all live in huge dormitories so that they have places to stay. And the other 1 million are from China. And they make up many of the taxi drivers, the bus drivers, the servers in the hotels, because over the years, the local population of Singapore, like America, certain jobs we don't want to do. Not that we're better than those jobs call for, but we're now educated and we want to move up the educational and professional ladder. So the population has grown, and it's anticipated it will continue to grow, but with specifications that they have to fit into certain types of categories, similar to what we do in America.
This all reflects an abiding intelligence. You start out with a swamp, and 50 years later, you're independent. You have an extraordinary community. You have all this great human resources. You have high-rise. You have this huge gaming casino island. What was the name of that island again?
Sentosa.
Sentosa Island. You have a population that's very productive and safe and clean and neat and all that. This is not a bad place to live. How did he do that? I mean, talk about focus, but I mean, how do you see so far into the future that you could create this?
Well, he's an unusual individual. As a matter of fact, I heard some rumors, and whether it's true or not, that when one of our governors here in Hawaii was being elected, and after his election, the president at that time advised this particular governor, says, please, if you want to do a good job, you are an island, so to speak, and in the ocean, and yet you will have all the problems of a big country. And in order for you to do a good job, my advice is for you to go take your top team members for a week or two and go and study what Mr. Lee Kuan Yew has done in Singapore. And from what I understand, he did so, and the result is quite good as far as that governor's reign was concerned.
Yeah.
And I feel that this is a very interesting thing that Sandy has brought up here. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew is a very visionary gentleman in the sense that he knows what he would like to do at the end or achieve at the end and how to get about doing it. And there are certain steps of importance to get there. It's just like the old Confucius saying that one cannot think of high ideals with an empty stomach. And what does it mean? That means if you take it in a larger scale, a country will not prosper unless the people are satisfied and have enough to eat, okay? Then they can think of other things. But first, they have to fill their stomach. Now,
Wait, before you go to the next point,
yes,
we're going to take a break.
okay.
It's time to take a break. I'm sorry. That's Alan Zecha, waxing. And he's a trustee of HPU, and he's also very familiar with Singapore and Lee Kuan Yew and Sandy Friedman. He's teaching for years and now teaching at DeVry University, and also very familiar with Singapore. These guys can tell us what has happened, the miracles there over the past 50 years. Here on Asia in Review, where we are giving tribute to Lee Kuan Yew, and we're calling this show In the Wake of Lee Kuan Yew. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
We're back, we're live, we're here on Asia in Review in the wake of Lee Kuan Yew with Alan Zecha and Sandy Friedman. Alan, you were waxing eloquent there. Can we continue that discussion?
Yes, where were we? But anyway, he is so visionary that he has everything scheduled and he knows exactly when, what should be done. And he stuck to it, you see. One of them that's very interesting that many people overlook is the fact that in China, we have this one-child policy, you remember? Now, he knew about that, and he also knew that we needed good people, but at the same time, we cannot overload the country because of the size of the area. And so what he did the same thing. But he did it in a slightly different way, which I like, is that you can have more than one child. The first child, we give the normal fees, and you can pay the normal expenses. The second child, you have to pay double or triple. And the third one is
More,
6
yeah.
times more. So that discourages. So he doesn't use the the compulsory thing that they have for the first child only in China. But he does it, but in a different way. And that's what I like about this
He
gentleman.
knew how to
Very
incentivize people.
That's it.
He knew about, may I say, capitalistic incentives. You know, there was a researcher by the name of Dwayne Gubler here in infectious diseases. He was one of the most well-known doctors in the world on infectious diseases. And Ed Cadman recruited him here for the medical school.
Yes, I know Ed Cadman well.
And at the end of the day, he left because Singapore recruited him there, where they gave him everything he wanted. And I think that's symbolic in the sense that Singapore knew how to get the people it wanted. It knew how to do incentives. In the case of Gubler, it wasn't necessarily the money, it was the researchers. They wanted to give him a facility, which is what he cared about most. And I'd like to, you know, from your point of view, Sandy, I mean, it's about money. Singapore is a modern capitalist, society where you can, in fact, shape the way people live, the way business is conducted and expanded by using financial incentives.
Definitely. Part of that concept, Jay, is that Lee Kuan Yew had the vision, but he also knew he had to hire the experts. And he went all over the world to hire the experts, and they hired them, period. But he also had a very selective staff of ministers. And these ministers today earn over $2.5 million a year in salary in order to keep them corruption-free. He's kept the government very small as far as numbers, but experts and advisors, they have plenty. And they have plenty of people who want to come and help Singapore. China often looks down at Singapore, looks down by way of sending delegations from China down to Singapore to see how they manage the things which they do. Keep in mind that Singapore is a city with a foreign policy. China has 600 cities.
It's a city-state.
China has 600 cities the size of Singapore, so it's a little bit more to manage. So Singapore has had the advantage of being small and manageable. However, Singapore is also vulnerable because being a small island, it is surrounded by hundreds of millions of Muslims. And there's always been a fear, and there has been riots in the past. As a result of that, Singapore started an alliance with the Israeli government, who likewise, very small in number and land size, but surrounded by millions of Muslims who have sworn to put Israel out of existence. So between the two countries having an affiliation, they have been able to capitalize on the assets of each country. Singapore has an entity called the Government of Singapore Investment Corporation. And they have an office in San Francisco, they have one in New York, and they will provide seed money for new business opportunities for whatever happens, developed in America and other countries.
This is so
Israel
different from Hawaii.
included. But you're given the seed money with the premise that once you've reached a certain level of success, your production is all moved to Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
So Singapore continues to grow. Today there are over 200 Israeli companies, startup, software, biochemical, new types of
In Singapore,
companies
doing
in
business.
Singapore, doing business
So
in
what's
Singapore.
the tax structure that he put in place?
I don't know the specifics, but
It's attractive.
It's attractive enough to get the companies to go to Singapore to do that. Now, I had mentioned that when Singapore broke away from Malaysia, the Malaysian economy was 64 times greater than Singapore. Last year, Singapore's economy was greater than all of Malaysia. So it just shows the hardworkingness, the focus of the people.
Shows you can do it. It's doable.
And they did it.
In
They did
Hawaii,
it.
we don't really feel that it's doable, but it is doable.
It
You know,
is
part of the
doable.
thing also, and this goes to the thing about the ministers, and Lee Kuan Yew himself. If you wanted to get hold of him, have a coffee, lots of luck. And if you want to get hold of his ministers and have a schmooze and try to, you know, do lobbying with them, lots of luck. You know, somehow, aside from achieving very powerful and uncorruptible public officials, he found a way to create a system where it was depoliticized. Their primary, again, focus, their primary mission is to do the job.
Economic stability, feed the people.
And that means it's hard to get to see them because they're busy doing their job.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
But you did mention
Wait,
casinos.
Alan
I'm
has
sorry.
something.
go ahead.
Please, Al.
But, well, I think actually, coming back now, we're not talking about Hawaii now, but I think that if you follow in what the Silicon Valley has done in California, I think we can duplicate it here in Hawaii because it is not a smokestack industry that we're talking about. It's all brain, all what you have in your little here that you make, and then what you invent, what you do, you can farm it out and let other people somewhere else do it for you. And Silicon Valley is strictly that. And Silicon Valley, of course, has been supported with the Stanford and the UC Berkeley. And here we have the beginnings of it. And I feel that sooner or later, we can do that. But we do not have the momentum yet that people realize this, because we have a UH, and we have, of course, that is the federal and the state one, and then we have one that's HBU, which is the private one, and I hope one day it will become the Stanford of Hawaii. And the other thing that we need are the people. And the people who are motivated in Silicon Valley are not yet so in Hawaii because we never had the experience and the exposure to do so.
Well, that's why we're doing this show.
And now,
We want the people of Hawaii to
Yes.
know what happened, the miracle of Singapore.
but Lee Kuan Yew has already done that.
Yes.
And he did that, and he invited the best scientists and so forth. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, the one who cloned the dolly, the scientist in England, I think is now in Singapore also, and is doing that. So he has the attraction of the people. And why do they come there? It's because they know that the government is supporting that. One good example is, for example, the what we call the stem cell episode. You remember? And why America was behind is because maybe it's the Christian attitude that at that time also the science was the technology was
Maybe
not
we
there.
should become our own city-state.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah, that is politics, and my family has told me never go into politics, never go into religion, but do your business and do everything and treat them all the same. Yes. Well, anyway, he did that, and he was thinking that everybody should be given a chance. And now this is also very important that we should be aware of. When I go to many of the parties here and other places also in Asia, before like Singapore became prominent, I found that the teachers or the professor, the education people, always feel themselves to be like secondary citizens. The bankers, the professionals, and so forth are much more prominent and very well recognized. Now, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew recognized that, and that's why, as Mr. Friedman says here, that he is treating the educators in a different level compared to all the other countries. And he is treating them also in salary up to par with all the business people and so forth. If they are good, he pays them accordingly. And that is what makes them so attractive, and that's why people come. The researchers from everywhere became so,
Enamored.
intrigued, and they're there.
What you get is so many clever
right.
moves. Clever is the best word for it. Clever, visionary moves for year after year after year.
And as I understand also, the people who came from China and so forth, which they needed and so forth, but they also were very selective. Not just to find someone
not just
is
everybody.
That's
yeah.
right. People who are a little bit on the education side, the educated side, and so forth, so that when they do intermix, and you can't help those, that the offspring will be better than either of the parents.
We're going to talk about the future also. I mean, we're going to try to figure out what lessons we can learn from Singapore that are constitutional in these United States, and where we can go to follow them. Anyway, Alan Zecha, who is a trustee of HPU and very familiar with Singapore and what happens there, what has happened, the miracle there, and Sandy Friedman, also a teacher at DeVry University, and very familiar with all that has happened there in the last 50 years. And we're about to have we're just having now the 50th anniversary, just this week, isn't it?
Correct.
No.
The 50th, yes.
Yeah, later this year.
Later this year.
In July.
Okay, here we are in Asia in Review, and we're in the wake of Lee Kuan Yew trying to figure out the miracle and how we can learn from it. We'll be right back.
Inspired by an ancient culture, classical Chinese dance, vigorous physicality, timeless stories, 5,000 years of Chinese music and dance, Shen Yun presents authentic Chinese culture. Coming to Blaisdell Concert Hall, May 8th and 9th. Tickets at shenyun.com or call 808-792-3919.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Yeah, I think Hawaii, you guys probably agree with me, that Hawaii really hasn't paid enough attention to Singapore. It hasn't learned about the miracle of Singapore. It hasn't learned enough about Lee Kuan Yew. But now, at his death, it's a retrospective for us, and maybe we can find out some lessons, and we can, take those lessons to heart and improve our own society. You're talking about transportation.
Prior to transportation, Jay, let me just say that there are some very notable people living in Singapore who are from Hawaii. One of them happens to was Lee Kuan Yew's sister-in-law, in that she married Lee Kuan Yew's youngest brother. And Camellia Lee has been a friend of both Hawaii and Singapore and has often entertained delegations from Hawaii in Singapore to show them how and why things are being done. But nothing's come of it back here in Hawaii. Another individual is Dr. Alfred Yee, one of the world's leading structural engineers, who here in Hawaii built the Arizona Memorial, Hilton Hawaiian Village, Ala Moana Hotel, and in Singapore, he's on the board of the Housing Development Board of Singapore, building all
The housing that Alan was talking about.
Yeah, where 80% of the people live. And recently, he was involved with the building of the Marina Bay Sands Casino. Now, you had mentioned, Jay, that no gambling. True. Under Lee Kuan Yew, he swore that there would never be gambling in Singapore. Now that his son is the third prime minister of Singapore, he allowed Singapore to build 2 casinos.
Huge.
One huge. Marina Bay Sands cost $5 billion, the figure the same as our rapid transit system. And the other casino is put up by the Lim Group out of Malaysia, who on the island of Sentosa has put up a mammoth casino. These 2 casinos in 2 years have put Singapore as the number 2 revenue generator of all the casinos in the world. Number 1 is Macau. Number 2 is Singapore. Number 3, far behind, is Las Vegas.
That's perfect. But
So-
you mentioned his son.
Yep.
And we have a few minutes left. I'd like to sort of move into the future a little. So Lee Kuan Yew didn't, just quit and disappear. He left office in the early 90s, but he stayed in office and consulted and supported and made his son into the leader to follow. And there was an article in the New York Times in the last couple of days, also in commemoration of Lee Kuan Yew's death, about how the son didn't have the same political acumen or control.
Or
and now,
charisma.
Well, charisma.
That's very important.
And now it's not necessarily going to be the same for Singapore. So my question to you guys is, how has that changed? In other words, it's not Lee Kuan Yew anymore. It's his son for the past decade or two, and it does have an effect. How is Singapore changing because of the change of the guard?
I think, as Sandy mentioned, when you run a country, you do need someone on the top who is very firm and also very action-wise, says what he does or does what he says and does not deviate and be very consistent about it. And people then follow and say, wow, that is a leader. And I think he has enough people underneath him, including his son, who realizes what the father has done and what the father has made something from nothing, so to speak. And I think because of that, since they all are intelligent people and still young and dynamic, and I think they will realize that they have to maintain this in order to keep up with what is going on. And I think also talking about the population, they have now a certain number that they think they would like to limit it to what, 6 million, is it?
More like 8 million.
Now 8
Gee
million.
whiz.
I don't
Was
know
8
what it
million
is.
in a place half the size of
Yes.
Oahu.
Well, it
Okay.
was
But it's-
10 million, but they backed off a
Okay,
little.
yes.
Yeah.
But because of that, they have to make sure that those people that they are going to add will be doing the same thing or have the same pattern of being selected the same way as was done in the past. Otherwise, everything will be a little bit unexpectedly negative.
Is it going to work, Sandy?
I'm not a prophet, I can't say. But to give a plug, Jay, about a year and a half ago, prior to his death, but he was ailing, Lee Kuan Yew wrote a book
He died
called,
in 91, right?
correct,
Yes.
One Man's View of the World.
Mhm.
And this is based on his meetings with the world's leaders, be it from China, Thailand, America, Russia, and he voices how he sees the world operating today and what he foresees 20 years from now. And they're not going to tell you what he foresees. One should go out and buy the book. It is available on Amazon. So One
Man's view of the world, Lee Kuan Yew.
So
Correct.
it's well worth reading in order to get the input of this number one in his graduating class at Cambridge, brilliant man. The only one who surpassed him was his wife, who
He
died
married
about
well.
very well, who died several years ago. But the future is up to the people of Singapore. They've had some problems. The leading People's Action Party that Lee Kuan Yew had founded has lost some ground in the last elections, but it's structured so that they're still in control. And I think they will remain in control, but the voice of the minority is being heard. And as the population does age, the demands on the government for social input, more housing activities for the senior citizens, is being heard. So Singapore is addressing those
You have to be
issues.
flexible. You can't stay on your old parameters. You have to move ahead. The world is changing, and internally they're changing.
Yeah.
There was another book he wrote, too, about people, the people he knew. What was that?
Well, this is the one on the people who.
This
he
is the
knew.
one that people, the
Yeah.
people who made his
He's
work.
written a few other books, which are all listed on Amazon. But before we go, Jay, let me just say we are all confronted by traffic congestion. Singapore thought they had the solution by charging anyone who wanted to buy a car that you had to buy a permit to buy a car. That permit today costs 65,000 US just to buy the car, regardless of what car you buy. When you choose the car you're going to buy, you're going to pay about 3 times what you would pay here in Hawaii. My son drives a Honda CVR. Cost him for the permit and the car $125,000 US. But the car is good only for 10 years. No car over 10 years old is allowed on the roads of Singapore. They have to get rid of them all because they don't want cars breaking down. Yet, Singapore has become very rich, so they have a total car population of 1 million of what
You know,
we have
it's
a million
wonderful
also.
to live in a country where they can make these decisions. It's like Sim City. Whatever decision you want to make, you can make. So I'd like to close with you, Alan. You mentioned before that Hawaii was hopefully on the road to achieving some of the things that Singapore has achieved. We have our impediments, that's for sure. But I wonder if you could talk about how we can best learn from them and how we can best be more like them in terms of being a self-sustaining, profitable, and socially aware city where everyone has a quality of life.
I feel that sooner or later, because of the modern technologies that goes around, and also very quickly, whatever is done here, pretty soon you'll see it over there, that they can see that what Singapore has done, and we are not different. The only thing is we have never experienced it. It's just like at one time, America, you remember, and there's a very simple analogy. When you talk to an American who only knows English and knows only English, when he speaks to a foreigner, that he or she herself will say, well, you know, in America, we only know one language, and that's why we can't do it. It's a myth. They can do it. But at that time, the economical situation in America was so good that they did not have to rely on the other countries or internationally. But when the international people start coming in and the competition became very great, they were forced to do it. And now look, all Americans can speak the same language. They can speak all the other things that we thought could not be done. And the same thing, I think, will happen with Hawaii when they see Singapore, a small little island of 7 million people, and can do this. And actually, we are already ahead of Singapore in a way because we have the hapas here.
God bless the Hapas.
And they are
They
terrific.
are the future of the world.
And if you believe what Darwin says, you know, when the two sides and their, what you call their genes are not affected of any way,
And you can
the
do
better is the
anything.
better than either parent. And the same thing is happening in Singapore.
Yes.
And that's one. The next thing is, you see, small island of Singapore can do things. We in Hawaii, as you say, have the mountains, have everything. That's beautiful. Where they have only flat land, like in Mongolia.
We should be able to do
We
as
should
well
be
as
able
they
to
can.
do it. That is correct.
Okay, well, hold that thought. We're going to do, first, we're going to put the website on the screen for the Singapore Center of Livable Cities, which is www.clc.gov.sg for Singapore. Okay, and you can get a free newsletter there, yeah?
Yes.
And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to put a picture of Lee Kuan Yew on the screen. And we're going to close our show, gentlemen.
But just
With-
one more thing quickly.
Yes,
And as we talked about Lee Kuan Yew, he's the leader of Singapore.
yes.
Now, do we have a leader like that for Hawaii? That is the question.
I'm not sure whether it's you, Alan, or you, Sandy, but I think there are possibilities. We'll have a picture of Lee Kuan Yew and a moment to, a moment to honor him. Remembering Lee Kuan Yew, 1923 to 2015, just last week. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
I
you,
was
Jay. Thank you.
very happy to be here and to contribute to the future success of not only Singapore, but of Hawaii.
Let's hope so, Alan.
Yes.
Let's hope
Thank
so.
you.
Alan Zecha and Sandy Friedman here on Asia in Review in the wake of Lee Kuan Yew. Aloha.